Hello viewers and welcome to Sized Robotics. Seeing as my larger videos seem to be protracting somewhat out of control lengthwise, I decided to take some of the concepts that I introduced in those videos and slim them down into 10-minute or so bite-sized videos that you could watch while drinking a coffee. This one is dedicated towards who you are trying to sell your robot to. But in order to really understand that, we need to start with the market opening that you seized to begin with. So, what could this market opening be? Well, if you're looking to build a new robot, then it could be that an advance of technology created some form of opportunity somewhere. So a better autonomous system came along that allowed you to do more things than you did to begin with. The next is that maybe there's a major economic shift in the country. There are not as many people to work, so you need to automate more of your factories. Simple, easy. And then more recently, as we are so intent on killing ourselves as a species, we could end up putting autonomous systems onto the battlefield, as has recently happened in the Ukraine war. That has drastically increased the interest in autonomous systems and drones. Then, of course, you've got the simple modifications of a design. Perhaps you could improve an existing robot, make it lighter, more energy efficient, do slightly more things. Or maybe someone tried to do a design before and failed due to any number of reasons, but you think that you can actually get it to work. All power to you. Maybe you can, maybe you can't. But the only way to find out is to actually just get your hands dirty and try and move on with it. So, now that we've looked at the potential market opportunities, who are the people who come along with said market opportunities? Well, let's start with the attitudes that they could potentially have to your robot. As I said before in my video on failing in concept, it's no use trying to sell a robot to an audience that didn't want it to begin with. Now, what do you need to actually bear in mind when looking at this? Existing cultural and religious biases. Obviously, if there is some sort of religious stricture against utilizing robotics, then trying to sell it to them is a non-starter in the first place. As for cultural, well, it's a similar thing, but there tends to be more leeway in that. If you have the time and the PR to do it, perhaps you could change attitudes, but I wouldn't put money on it, let's put it that way. And of course you have the effect of progressing automation on consumer attitudes. Now this is where people have utilized existing robotics in a hostile fashion towards the consumer. So we replaced all the jobs in a factory with robots when we didn't really need to. This obviously has the effect of souring people against robotics, and you do need to bear that in mind if you are trying to sell robotics in the same country that this is happening in. And of course, simply, people have seen many other robotics projects fail of their own accord. And of course, their default attitude towards this will be that your project is probably going to fail as well. So they're not going to put a lot of time and attention into it. Again, in order to combat this, you're going to have to sink the time and effort into persuading them otherwise. Or if you don't have the money for that, seriously consider whether this project is going ahead. And now we get on to the most important aspect of this question, the spending power of the consumer. How much money are they willing to spend on your robot? First, we must measure the development and production costs against the projected market price. Easy enough to do at the beginning of the project, but as mistakes are made and faults in the robot occur, those development costs are going to increase, and that means that the projected market price of the robot will increase at a commensurate rate in order for you to make your money back. many roboticists fail to take account of this, as increasing costs will shrink the target audience as the price of the robot goes up. This means that any vagaries of economics can abruptly kill the smaller target audience. If you have a very small target audience in a very specific place, if the business that they are all umbrellaed under suddenly collapses, then suddenly your target audience disappears and your robot is suddenly unviable in the marketplace. Not a good place to be. How do we combat this? We cast as broad a net as possible in order to get as many people invested in the robot as possible. That way, the robot is insulated against market changes. And of course, a very important aspect of the question is the preferences in style of your audience. Are they going to accept how the robot looks? Because as the robot's price increases, the people you are pitching this to are going to have quite high expectations of the robot for the price that you're trying to flog it for. So, don't try to sell a robot clad in cheap plastic for a lot of money. This happens so often, and it really shouldn't. Because when you're buying a robot for anywhere up to about 5 figures, $50,000 for a plastic robot, that's obviously a non-starter. It should at the very least be clad in metal, preferably something that looks good. So, if for some reason this concept is completely alien to you, which it really shouldn't, but apparently it is, seeing as most roboticists make this mistake, liaise closely with your consumers so you are aware of what they want. If they say they want some Damascus steel exterior for their robot, and you give them a cheap plastic robot, it's not going to work. So, let's apply all of what we have just discussed into a case study. This is a robot vacuum. You've seen them on YouTube everywhere. They're all the same design, made by different people. It's obviously designed as a time-saving measure. The robot vacuums so you don't have to. They are relatively cheap. Maybe you think several hundred quid is quite expensive, maybe not. But that's how it is for robotics. But the fact is that at several hundred quid it is somewhat affordable for most people. But at the several hundred quid you don't get a lot for your money. It basically just goes in straight lines around the room, bouncing off of anything it goes into and then changing direction. Not the greatest example of an autonomous system, but is there an opportunity here? Well, firstly, as an aside, you're going to have to excuse my rather bad skills in image editors, but seeing as a picture is worth 1,000 words, I figured that even if it was a bad picture, it'd give you some idea of what I'm trying to achieve here. So, back to the main subject, how can we improve this robot hoover? Well, first things first, we can improve the pathfinding to avoid furniture. For the more exclusive clientele, they will probably have priceless antiques and other expensive things in their living room. So a robot that finds its way around by banging into things is not going to be an attractive prospect. Therefore, we add sensors to the robot in order for them to navigate around these expensive pieces of furniture and avoid damaging them. Second, we add an arm with the nozzle to reach difficult places. Obviously, the robot can't get into tight areas, but if we put a robot arm on the robot that can then reach into tight corners and other weird places in order to hoover, then the robot can now hoover places that its predecessor cannot. Thirdly, add danger recognition so the robot does not damage itself by sucking up something it shouldn't. Image recognition is a big thing these days. Adding that into the robot to recognize things that, if it sucked up, would damage its internals is fairly straightforward. So, considering these modifications, what does that do to our consumer base? Well, as I said, collision and danger avoidance alleviates maintenance costs. If the robot hasn't sucked up anything, then it doesn't need to go back to the manufacturer to be replaced. Secondly, the collision avoidance doesn't damage anything expensive in the room. And more of the floor gets cleaned, because it can get into places that its predecessor doesn't. What are the cons though? Well, there's major increase in the cost of the robot, price and development. More features means it's more expensive, more features means more development to get these features right. And of course, because of the mapping that the robot will have to do to avoid objects in the room, the first time setup of the robot in the room will be quite intensive as you try and work out what the robot can see and what it can't. So what does all of this do to our consumer base? Well, increased development, increased production, increased features equals increased cost. So, while the existing robot at a couple of £100 may have been affordable for everyday people, our new robot, which is probably going to be in the 1,500, is going to only really be considered by the middle class and above. But is this increase in price necessarily a bad thing? I would argue no. The existing robot is more than sufficient for the needs of everyday people. The new model, with its ability to avoid expensive things, get into awkward places, is only really needed for someone with an expensive house with expensive furniture in it, which realistically is the middle class and above. So the increase in price doesn't really affect us that much. But if you're uncertain of this, how do we take advantage? Well, best way to do it is to just talk with them. Will they accept it? Will they accept the price? But the most important question in this talk that you need to answer is, how does the robot benefit them? Which will be the content of the next bite-sized robotics video. Well, that's it for today. Hope you've enjoyed the video, and as always, have a great day.